Hi, welcome to How Stitcher Reactivates Lost Listeners. I'm your host, Imelda Skinder. I am a Lifecycle Marketing Manager at Stitcher. At Stitcher, I manage all aspects of Lifecycle, push, email strategy. I have a background in audience growth, which led to my love for attention and personalized marketing. I'm also obsessed with audio storytelling, which is why I work at Stitcher. And my beautiful, adorable little schnauzer mix, Boris. You see there, we're matching. So a little bit about Stitcher. We're an end-to-end podcast company. Stitcher was founded in 2007. It's not just an app, it's also a network, and combined with Midroll Media, which is an advertising leader in the space. Today, Stitcher is solidified its position as an end-to-end podcast company and a leader in all parts of the ecosystem: content production, distribution, and monetization. And it was recently acquired by SiriusXM Pandora. On the slide, you'll also see some of our pretty well-known shows: Conan O'Brien, Science Rules, Scam Goddess, and Office Ladies, and LeVar Burton. He's got this amazing podcast called LeVar Burton Reads. If you haven't heard it, I highly recommend. And also, Science Rules is also a good one. I once saw Bill Nye in the lunchroom once, and he was carrying around a beaker as a coffee mug, so he is legitimately a science fanatic. On today's agenda, we'll go over churned user behavior, audience segmentation, experiments, and testing and learnings. So what does the Stitcher listener lifecycle kind of look like? So we focus on three big buckets, three big funnels: onboarding, engagement, and reactivation. Onboarding and reactivation are the most important to me. And I'll tell you guys a little bit why. That's why we're talking about it today. But onboarding, basically leverage push and email series. We rely heavily on podcast content. So podcast recommendations, making sure that people know where to find those podcasts in the app, and then highlight product features and that we think might increase app adaptation and that we think also that users might love. In the engagement funnel, we do a lot of push and email blasts. They're personalized based on listening behavior in these audience segments around genres, like so comedy, news, true crime, the big genres. We put users in those buckets and serve them personalized podcast recommendations, as personalized as we can get at the moment as we continue to test and grow. In our reactivation funnel, my favorite funnel, the most important one, I think, starts at 7 days. When a user goes more than 7 days without listening, we consider them at risk. We start to worry about them and start reaching out to them. We also have 3 stages as a part of reactivation: risk of churn, which I mentioned, churning, and churned. And this funnel is very push heavy. When you think about how you get a user back, push sort of really outperforms email when it comes to those kinds of things. Once a user's out, they're not thinking about your brand, they're thinking about something else. So push really kind of like wakes them up a bit. It's like a nice little nudge. So how do we get this data, this wonderful data, into Iterable to help us execute these workflows? We leverage iOS, Android, web clients, and backend data pipeline to funnel in that data and update user properties and custom events in real time. But why do I love retention reactivation? Why is reactivation so important? Well, churn is expensive. It negatively impacts growth. Replacing users is far more expensive than rescuing them. Churn rates have a direct impact on LTV and can compound over time. So super important to try to keep these users engaged with the app. For us, we want them to stay and listen to podcasts and feel like we do about them. So to execute these campaigns, we did a deep dive on what churn user behavior looked like in the app. I worked with Asa Jordan on our team, amazing podcast analyst. We looked at 2 big things: when they were churning and what they were listening to. We saw the big churn sort of starts happening on the first 3 days. we could address that with onboarding campaigns, and then sort of it starts to sort of plateau, but around 7 day we saw another spike, kind of another little peak. So right at the tail end of the onboarding campaign, if a user didn't listen to any podcasts in 7 days, then we put them in the risk of churn bucket, and then they start their risk of churn reactivation campaign. And then what they were listening to, these top shows mirrored what we were seeing on all their platforms: This American Life, The Daily, My Favorite Murder, Joe Rogan. Makes sense. These are huge shows, so obviously those are going to have the highest number of churned or churning users. Prior to the analysis, we were really looking at reactivation audiences. Like we were thinking the risk of churn was like 14 days plus, churned was 30 days plus. We're thinking, okay, so if a user goes on vacation for 2 weeks, let's just not bother them. Like a lot of things happen in life. And then churned, typical 30-day plus, you're considered churn. Post-analysis which happened to be right sort of around the peak of the pandemic, when we started to see the behaviors change in listening with users. We re-examined it, and we started to build new audiences that kind of stacked up against each other. Risk of churn, users with no listens in the past 7 days, like I mentioned. Over 7 days, like I mentioned. Churning, which is a new one, sits right underneath that one. Tackles the users that we used to consider risk of churn. So anyone not listening over 14 days. And then the last one, churned, which is users who haven't listened in over 30 days and more. And so with those buckets, we then created 3 reactivation workflows. And this is an example of what the risk of churn and the churning workflow look like in Iterable. I love these little nodes. I can appreciate a really organized design that anyone can understand at all levels of the company. And this really does that. Also, when I click on these little boxes, I can open up and see real-time campaign analytics, which is fabulous for any marketer when you think about it. So anyway, okay, so the risk of churn example here shows a push triggered by a list that signals to this workflow that a user stopped listening more than 7 days ago. We send them a push right away, and this push is like, hey, discover new, look at new podcasts on the Discover page. And then we wait 3 days. We check to see if the user listened to anything in the app or opened the app at all. And if they haven't, they get another push. Repeats. We wait 3 days, and then we check, and then they get another nudge, another push. And then once they've completed that workflow and they still haven't listened, they end up in the churning funnel. Same thing here. We check to see if users haven't listened to anything. We build a list that is triggered by that, and then send them a push. Get a little bit more aggressive here, though. Instead of 3 days, it's 2 days. We don't want to wait too long on these users. They are churning, so the content in these nodes and these pushes also changes. Now it's more exciting content. Maybe it's a tiny bit clickbaity. It's more enticing content that we know we've tried and it works. And so then we check to see if they've listened or opened the app. And this time we support it with an email. So if they do open the app, okay, here's an email with more podcast recommendations, a variation of podcast recommendations based on whatever the user might like. Maybe they left because they were tired of listening to true crime. So how about some comedy? Try some news. It's just supporting that push. That cycle sort of repeats itself a few times, and then just like the previous workflow, if the user hasn't listened to anything in the app, they end up in the churn funnel. And this is just baseline for us. We're still experimenting and testing and looking for new ways to improve these workflows. Which brings me to my most favorite part of my job, which is running experiments on how to optimize these reactivation campaigns, or any campaign really. So I mentioned this before. when we looked at when users were churning and what they were listening to, we found that This American Life and The Daily were the biggest shows with the biggest number of users. So we ran a retargeting test where we sent a push to users who left, and we're like, hey, come back and listen to This American Life. There are 3 new episodes available. We found this did work. It brought had about a 1% click rate. Maybe they're catching up on This American Life, and then they're like, oh, what else did I miss? What other podcasts did I miss? Let me catch up on that too. And then we ran one of my favorite experiments as a true crime fan, a true crime experiment where we try to captivate users with a true crime series and a serialized episode, a true crime episode. So when we ran these tests, season versus episode, they had a very similar click rate, a 2% click rate, which is double what the retargeting show campaigns were showing. The only thing, they were listening to less. So they got higher click rate, but they came back an average of two times, maybe because they consumed that true crime episode, super curious, and maybe they listened to another one, but it just wasn't their jam, or they just didn't like the specific show. And so then we ran a current events experiment. And this one is kind of like an aha moment, like obviously topical events, anything that's current events is going to work because it's super relevant with what is going on with a listener's life at the moment, what they're hearing in the news. So piggyback, sort of like riding on the wave of like whatever is already trending, really, really worked. So we saw an average of 3% click rate. People were coming back into the app and we were reactivating like left and right. The product team is like, what is going on over there? We're seeing this huge spike in daily MAUs. What are you doing? And it was these types of pushes. We were driving a lot of traffic. But when we looked at the data, we were driving a lot of traffic, but people were maybe consuming that one episode and then leaving. So when we looked at these 3 experiments, we saw current events, true crime had 100% higher click rate. The show retargeting had 70% more listening. So fear of missing out and human curiosity has the potential to be a powerful reactivator, but combining data with what we know about human nature, like I think is super important to improving the performance of our reactivation campaigns. It's kind of easy to lean on data, but we have to recognize that at the other end of that push that we're sending is a human, and they have real interests. And why not leverage what's going on in life and in the news to get their attention and connect with them on a human level? So we're relatively new to Iterable. Big fan. We're just getting started. We have lots of experiments to do. I want to do so many things. Some of the most exciting things that are coming up are experimentation with bingeable shows, something I've been wanting to do for a very long time. So we're kind of taking a cue from Netflix, and if users consumed a season of a show, we'll serve them a new season of the same show or another show that they can consume after that, because if that's their style of shows, that's going to increase listening hours in the app. Getting better at really targeted messages, so really relevant to the user based on what they're listening. So I mentioned we do, we put them in genres, comedy, news, but how do we get better at even going more granular? How do we leverage maybe their favorite show to recommend them a show in the same network, podcasts, or something very, very, very similar? And then testing gamification and badges, another super exciting thing. We've been wanting to do this for a very long time, leveraging user stats to get users excited and build a community around podcast listening. So maybe you want to share that you've listened to 200 hours of podcasts with your friends on social, or maybe you just want to like brag about it to your mom. I don't know. Whatever it is, we want to sort of like build a sort of community around excitement around that with little exciting badges and icons that we can maybe get users to share and be proud of and really take ownership over their listening. So with that, we've come to an end. Some of the key takeaways. At Stitcher, data is super important. Churn data, keeping it fresh is super important. A lot of things could change. A lot of things did change in the past year, but keeping in mind that it's not always going to be that drastic. You don't need like a presidential election to like check your data. Anything could happen in the industry without your knowing about it. Anything like in the podcast space, for example, like we're looking at our podcast platform competitors. Maybe they launch a new feature, or maybe they're doing something different. So keeping that data fresh just to identify trends and then sort of come to the rescue. Leveraging past behavior to build audience segments, super important. I feel like nowadays, I don't know of a single person that doesn't do this, but identifying better ways to target, not just past behavior, but maybe it's past behavior, but like little things, like I mentioned earlier, like show favorites or last show listened, or something to get really better at targeting users and serving them content that they really care about so that they come back to consume it. Paying attention to trends and current events, topical, relevant content always works. We have to keep in mind that behind the push is a real person, and we're on it together. We see the news. We want to learn more about it, and podcasts are just sort of a perfect way to consume more of the stuff you're seeing, because you don't really have to read it or stop what you're doing to listen to it. And then test. Again, I don't know of a single marketer who is in testing, but the cool thing about testing is that you can optimize things, and there are so many levels of testing that we can do. And like, thanks to Iterable, now there are so many different ways we can test in real time and optimize so much faster and scale so much faster. Things from like testing subject lines on blasts. Always test a subject line in any email that you're sending. It's only going to increase your open rate, and it's only going to teach you how to get better at increasing that open rate. But even testing stuff in workflows in real time is amazing. But then also ideas, like not just in optimize your content in your open rates and click rates and emails and pushes, but also fresh ideas on how to connect with users, how to target users. Maybe, like the true crime test that we ran, that we were like, well, this content is spicy. Everyone is really into it right now. Let's see how it performs for the churned users. We're always thinking of new ways and brainstorming ways to like make that connection with a user better. Anyway, so thank you for watching and listening to my presentation. I'm so glad you're here. If you are a lover of podcast, consider downloading the Stitcher app and be my friend. If you have any questions about this presentation or want to talk about reactivation or what podcast you're listening to, I'm all ears. You can find me at the speaker Q&A at 2:15 to 2:45. I'd love to meet you. Thanks for watching again. Bye.